The lounge smelled of fresh-cut flowers and polished wood. Golden light spilled across marble floors, and every corner of the room gleamed like a photograph in a travel magazine. Elena moved through it like she belonged, her stride slow, confident, smooth. She wore a long silk dress the color of champagne, and soft curls fell over her shoulders like it was all effortless. But inside, she felt the quiet edge of anticipation. She was here for a reason. Her instructions had been simple. Get close to Julian Cross. Learn what made him tick. Draw him out. The client, someone rich and powerful enough to stay unnamed, wanted Elena to do what others hadn't. Get Julian to notice someone. Really notice. So far, no woman had lasted more than a few polite dinners with the man. Too serious, they said. Too guarded. Too devoted to his work. Elena didn't mind a challenge. That was what she was paid for. And then, he walked in. Julian Cross wasn't what she expected. He wasn't towering or intimidating. He wasn't cold or cocky like so many wealthy men she'd dealt with. He was tall, yes, and well-dressed in a navy button-down and dark slacks, but it was the quiet behind his eyes that caught her attention. A stillness, like he lived more in his mind than in the room. He walked with purpose but not arrogance, and when he spotted her, he paused. "Elena?" he asked, voice smooth like silk drawn across stone. "Yes," she said, smiling warmly, offering her hand. "It's lovely to meet you." His handshake was firm, but not forceful. He held her gaze just a little longer than polite, like he was curious, not just being polite. They sat across from each other in a corner booth surrounded by soft jazz and flickering candlelight. The hotel restaurant was quiet, discreet, perfect for a first impression. She ordered a cappuccino. He chose green tea. No wine, no alcohol, just conversation. "Have you lived in the city long?" he asked, tone casual but attentive. "A few years," she said, stirring her drink. "I travel a lot, but this place feels like home now." He nodded thoughtfully. "I don't get to explore it much. My work takes up most of my time." "You run a tech firm, right?" "That's what the papers say," he said, smiling gently. "But really, I just help ideas grow." There was no bravado in his words, no flash, just quiet confidence and a thoughtful mind. Elena leaned in a little, not because she had to but because she wanted to. For a moment, she forgot the reason. She was there. The conversation flowed easily. He talked about building things that lasted, about nature, about how he once got lost in the Swiss Alps and didn't mind because the silence felt like music. She listened, drawn in not just by his voice, but by the way he spoke, like the world still surprised him. "So," he said after a moment, "tell me something real." She blinked. "Something real? Something you wouldn't normally say on a first meeting?" Elena hesitated. She could lie. That was easy. Or she could give him something small, something harmless but true. "I like reading cookbooks," she said softly, "but I almost never cook." Julian chuckled. "So it's about the feeling of it, not the act?" "Exactly. I understand that," he said. "I sometimes design software I know I'll never release, just because I enjoy the process." Something fluttered in her chest. She wasn't pretending to like him. She did. After coffee, they moved to the garden terrace. The moon was high, and tiny lanterns glowed among the hedges. They walked slowly, side by side, brushing hands once or twice, but never holding. Julian stopped near a small fountain. "You know," he said, looking at the water, "most people try too hard to impress me." Elena tilted her head. "And what about me?" He smiled gently. "You didn't." And she hadn't. Somehow she'd forgotten the plan, forgotten the performance. With Julian, she didn't feel like a character in someone else's story. She felt seen. Later, when he offered to call a car for her, she shook her head. "I'll walk." "It's a nice night." He nodded, eyes soft. "Thank you for tonight." "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than she should. As she stepped into the night air, cool and full of city sounds, Elena didn't reach for her phone. She didn't report back. Not yet. Instead, she closed her eyes and smiled to herself. She had been hired to seduce him, but for the first time in her career, she wasn't sure who was truly being drawn in. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, a mirror of soft gold and blue. Elena stood at the edge of the veranda, a mug of warm tea in her hands. The scent of salt and lemon drifted up from the garden below. Julian's seaside estate wasn't grand in a flashy way. It was quiet, elegant, with wide windows that let the light in and bookshelves filled with well-worn novels and astronomy journals. She had arrived the night before. Julian had asked her carefully, almost shyly, if she'd like to spend the weekend by the coast. Elena had said yes before she could think of a reason to say no. Now, wrapped in a linen robe, she watched the waves crash in slow, rhythmic pulses. The calm of it touched something deep inside her. Behind her, she heard bare feet on wood. Julian. He moved past her without a word and stood beside her, matching her gaze. "Still think it's a nice night," he said, voice husky from sleep, "but I think the morning's even better." She smiled, not turning. "I like that you're up early. Most people sleep in when they're at places like this. I like to see the world before it fully wakes up," he said, sipping from his mug. "It reminds me that I'm part of something bigger." They stood like that for a while, not speaking. There was no pressure to fill the silence, just the breeze and the smell of tea and his presence, steady and unshakable beside her. Later, he made breakfast, not with a staff, not catered. Julian stood in the open kitchen, sleeves rolled up, flipping pancakes and slicing peaches like he did it every weekend. Elena sat at the island, chin in her hands, watching him move with practiced grace. "You cook?" she asked, pretending to be surprised. "I like food," he said simply. "I like what it does to people, brings them together." "I didn't expect that." "You mean the billionaire tech guy flipping pancakes for his guest?" She laughed. "Something like that." He grinned and set a plate in front of her. "Try it before you tease me." She did, and moaned softly. "Okay, you win. This is amazing." His eyes flickered up at her reaction, lingering just a heartbeat too long. She saw something there, not desire, not yet, but interest, a quiet flame. After breakfast, they walked the garden paths. Wild roses climbed over trellises and soft grass brushed their ankles as they moved. Julian spoke about the stars, how he'd grown up with a telescope instead of toys, how he used to think Venus was a goddess watching over him. "I still look up sometimes and whisper to her," he admitted with a soft laugh. "Stupid, right?" Elena shook her head. "No, I think it's beautiful." He stopped walking and looked at her. "You make it easy to talk," he said, "like it's just natural." "It is," she replied before thinking. She wasn't supposed to say things like that. She was supposed to be careful, calculated, but the truth kept slipping past her lips like sunlight through an open curtain. They reached the edge of the property, where a stone bench overlooked the sea. Julian sat. Elena joined him, their knees almost touching. "Tell me something real," he said again, like he had at the lounge. Elena hesitated. "I used to dance," she said finally. "Ballet, for almost 10 years. I thought it would be my life." "Why did you stop?" "I don't know," she said quietly. "Life took me in a different direction." He nodded, respectful. He didn't push. She looked at him then, at the slight scruff on his jaw, the wind in his hair, the thoughtful crease between his brows. He was more than a job, more than a name and a target. She wanted to know him not as a mark but as a man. When they returned to the house, the sun was already warm above them. Julian handed her a book from his shelf. "It's about a man who falls in love with the sea," he said. "But really, it's about learning to let go of fear." "I'd like that," she said. That afternoon, they didn't talk much. They sat on opposite ends of the wide couch, reading, sometimes glancing up and smiling without words. There was something peaceful in that silence, like they were learning each other through presence alone. As the light turned golden again and the ocean shimmered like molten glass, Julian reached across the couch and gently tucked a strand of hair behind Elena's ear. "You belong here," he whispered. Elena's heart beat louder than it should have. The breeze from the window touched her skin, but she didn't shiver. She only smiled. In that moment, she forgot the job entirely. She wasn't here to seduce him. She was already falling for him. The next morning arrived soft and slow, like a whisper through gauze curtains. Ellen awoke to the quiet hum of the sea, the smell of sunlight warming stone and lemon trees drifting through the open windows. She stretched under the light cotton sheets, a smile already on her lips before her eyes opened fully. She wasn't used to this, waking up in a stranger's guest room and feeling completely at peace. But Julian didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Not in the quiet way he watched the sky, not in the gentle way he listened. Wrapping herself in a light robe, Elena padded barefoot down the stairs. The house was quiet, except for birdsong and the faint rustle of movement from the garden. She found him kneeling beside a flower bed, hands deep in soil, sleeves pushed up, a little dirt smudged across his forearm. The sight of him focused, calm, completely in his element stilled something inside her. She stayed there for a while, just watching. Eventually, he looked up, smiled. "I'm terrible at sitting still," he said, brushing dirt from his palms. "I always need something to grow." "What are you planting?" she asked, stepping closer. "Wild roses," he said. "The kind that aren't perfect. A little wild, a little unpredictable, but they survive anything." She crouched beside him. "You like that?" "I like things that take time, that don't give in too easily." Elena felt that, like a thread tugging gently at her ribs. She looked at his hands, rough with soil, strong and steady. When he reached up to push her hair behind her ear, his fingers brushed her temple and lingered. "I like your hair down," he said softly. She didn't look away. "I wear it up when I'm working." "Are you working now?" She shook her head, breath catching. "No, I don't think I am." Something shimmered between them in that moment, unspoken, but deeply understood. They spent the afternoon cooking together. Julian handed her tomatoes and herbs while soft jazz played through the kitchen. She grated cheese, slicing olives while his arm brushed hers again and again. It felt domestic, like something from another life, like something real. At one point, he leaned in to steal a bite of her bruschetta. Their faces were close, closer than they needed to be. "You're dangerous," he murmured. "Why?" she whispered, breathless. "Because I don't usually do this, let people in." She smiled. "Me neither." He stepped back then, letting the moment cool, but the air between them stayed warm, electric. They ate on the balcony overlooking the sea. Sunset turned the sky apricot and lavender. Julian poured sparkling water into 2 glasses and handed one to her. "To unexpected weekends," he said, raising his glass. Elena clinked hers against his. "And good company." Later, as the sky darkened and stars began to appear one by one, Julian brought out a telescope. "Let me show you something," he said. He positioned it, then stepped aside. "Look." Elena bent down and peered in. A planet glowed bright against the velvet night. "Jupiter," he said softly, "with its moons." She stepped back and looked at him. "It's beautiful." "So are you," he said, not as a line but as a fact. Elena's heart slowed, then sped up again. He wasn't playing. He wasn't pretending. He just saw her. She moved closer, drawn like the tide to the shore. He reached out gently, cradled the side of her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. "You make me feel calm," he said. "Like I've been chasing the wrong kind of silence my whole life." Then he leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was soft, gentle, exploring. His hands slid into her hair, threading through the strands like he wanted to memorize the feel of her. She pressed her palms to his chest, steady and strong beneath her touch. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't fiery. It was a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, she didn't speak. Neither did he. They just stood there, forehead to forehead, wrapped in stars and breath and something that felt like the slow start of forever. Elena had seduced men before, professionally, smoothly, effortlessly. But this was the first time she was the one being unraveled. The day started bright, with sunlight pooling on the hardwood floors and soft music drifting from the speakers. Elena stood by the kitchen island in one of Julian's shirts, sipping freshly squeezed orange juice. It hung loose on her, smelling faintly of cedar and salt, and she liked the way it made her feel casual, natural, like she belonged here. Julian entered a moment later, barefoot, still slightly tousled from sleep. He stopped when he saw her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You wear me well," he murmured. Elena raised a brow, feigning innocence. "You mean your shirt?" "No," he said, walking over and brushing a kiss to her temple. "You wear me well." She blushed, something that didn't happen often. She was used to control, to charm, to playing the part. But with Julian, her usual scripts dissolved into soft silences and genuine laughter. They spent the late morning on the terrace, reading together again, sometimes aloud, sometimes quietly. She lay across the outdoor lounge chair with her legs draped over his lap, her fingers gently stroking the back of his hand. Julian would occasionally trace slow circles on her knee with his thumb, and neither of them said anything about it. They didn't have to. After lunch, clouds began to gather. Thunder grumbled somewhere in the distance, low and deep like a sleepy lion. "It might rain," Julian said, glancing at the sky. "I don't mind." He looked at her, something playful lighting in his eyes. "Want to go for a walk anyway?" She grinned. You know what? Yes. They stepped out barefoot onto the stone path winding through the garden. The air was thick with the smell of roses and sea salt. The sky darkened quickly, and within minutes, a sudden downpour fell, not harsh, but warm and steady, like the earth had finally exhaled. Elena laughed and tilted her head back, arms wide. Rain soaked her hair, slicked down the shirt she wore, but she didn't care. Julian stood still for a moment, watching her like she was a painting coming to life. Then he stepped forward, took her hands in his, and pulled her close, their bodies pressed together, wet, warm, wrapped in that soft, silver curtain of rain. Her breath caught in her throat. His eyes searched hers, and she didn't know who leaned in first. But then their mouths met again, this time not soft or slow, but deep, hungry in a gentle way. Their kiss melted into the storm, rain sliding down their faces, their hands tightening against each other's bodies. She curled her fingers into his soaked shirt. He slid his hand along her waist, over her hip, anchoring her to him. The kiss felt endless, like time had curled around them and decided to stop. And in that kiss, Elena forgot everything else. Who she was supposed to be, why she had come. The job, the client, the script, none of it mattered anymore. She kissed him because she wanted to, because it felt like she'd been holding her breath for years and he was the first place she could exhale. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathing hard, water dripping from their brows, Julian rested his forehead against hers. You are, he began, but couldn't seem to find the word. You just are. She laughed, soft and breathless. That might be the best thing anyone's ever said to me. They walked back to the house, clothes soaked, fingers intertwined. Inside, Julian grabbed 2 fluffy towels and handed her one. She dried her hair, her cheeks flushed from rain and heat and something far deeper. Julian set a fire in the living room, and they changed into dry clothes, Elena wearing another one of his shirts, this time over cotton shorts, Julian in joggers, and a soft navy tee. They curled up together on the couch, the fire crackling beside them, the rain tapping gently against the windows. Elena rested her head on his shoulder. He stroked her arm slowly with his fingertips. And no one spoke for a long time. Then Julian whispered, I don't know what this is yet, but I want to find out. Elena closed her eyes. Me too. In that simple moment, in warmth, in silence, in the afterglow of rain and lips and touch, they weren't strangers anymore. They were something else, something new, something that felt like the beginning of love. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting soft amber light across the room. The rain had stopped hours ago, but neither Elena nor Julian had moved far from the warmth of the fireplace. They sat closer than before, sharing a throw blanket, her head resting on his chest, his arm draped around her shoulders, fingers moving gently along her skin in thoughtful strokes. It wasn't the kind of silence that needed filling. It was the kind of silence that meant something had already been said. Elena lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was a stillness between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of heat, of understanding, of a question neither needed to ask. He reached out, brushing his fingers along her cheek, then down the side of her neck. She closed her eyes and leaned into his touch, her breath catching softly in her throat. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't like the rain, or like the first soft press of lips under moonlight. It was slower, deeper, intentional. He held her face like it was fragile, like she mattered, like he didn't want to rush what was unfolding between them. She climbed into his lap, arms wrapping around his shoulders, and he drew her closer than close, his hands exploring the lines of her back through the thin fabric of his shirt. Her heartbeat thrummed against his chest. He leaned back onto the couch cushions, gently pulling her with him. Her fingers ran through his hair, slow and tender, as he looked up at her with something reverent in his eyes. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their hands said everything. The feel of her skin beneath his fingertips, the way her breath trembled when his lips traced down her neck, the sigh that left her when she finally let herself melt against him. They undressed each other like unwrapping something precious, never hurried, never rough, just discovering, just feeling, just being present in the warm glow of everything they hadn't said but had always felt. The couch became a sanctuary, soft pillows, warm skin, shared gasps and slow kisses. The storm outside had passed, but a gentler one bloomed between their bodies, touch after touch, breath after breath, until they were no longer two people, but one. His hands moved down her spine, her name escaping him like a prayer. She answered with a soft moan, her lips finding his again. There was no need for perfect choreography. They learned each other like music learned by instinct. Slow, then slower. There was something sacred in it, something unspoken that bloomed. Behind every gentle movement, every whispered name, every pause where their eyes met and stayed. And when it was over, when their bodies finally stilled and breath evened, Julian kept her in his arms. She lay against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, feeling the softness of his hand stroking lazy circles on her hip. I've never, she began, then stopped. Julian's fingers paused. What? I've never made love like that before. He pulled her closer. Neither have I. Elena blinked slowly, heart full, because that's what it had been, love. Not just pleasure, not just a night. Love. In the way he kissed her shoulder after. In the way he tucked a blanket around her without asking. In the way he made no promises with words, but every one of them. In the way he held her. They stayed like that until the fire faded completely. And when he carried her upstairs to his bed, not because he needed more, but because he wanted her near, she went without a word, curling into his side like she had always belonged there. That night, neither of them dreamed, because nothing in their sleep could feel more real than what they had just shared. Awake. Morning came gently, with pale sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains, and a hush that felt almost sacred. Elena opened her eyes slowly, feeling the warm weight of Julian's arm wrapped around her waist. His breath brushed the back of her neck, calm and steady. She didn't move, didn't want to disturb the peace. Not yet. She stared at the ceiling, heart full and heavy. It had been days since she reported back. The phone calls, the texts from the client, had gone unanswered. She could almost feel the mission dissolving into something else, something unprofessional, something undeniably personal. She turned slowly, careful not to wake him. His face was so peaceful when he slept, like all the weight he carried during the day faded in dreams. She brushed her fingers lightly through his hair and closed her eyes again. She didn't want to lose this. Later, in the kitchen, she watched him cook again. He handed her a cup of coffee, fingers grazing hers. No words, just warmth. They ate breakfast. On the balcony, fruit and toast, bare feet and laughter, soft sunlight dancing over the sea. He spoke about a new idea he had for a passion project, something with renewable energy and AI, but Elena only half heard him. Her heart was louder than her ears. She was falling, or already fallen. And there was still something he didn't know. That afternoon, Julian suggested they take the car into the hills. There was a lookout point he wanted to show her. She agreed, without hesitation. She'd go anywhere with him now. The drive was quiet and lovely. Winding roads through olive trees and wildflowers. The windows down, music low. When they reached the top, the view stretched endlessly, green hills rolling into soft sky, the ocean glittering far beyond. Julian stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. I used to come here when I needed to think, he said. Before the company, before everything got fast. She leaned back into him. Do you still come here to think? I think I'm here for a different reason now. They stood like that for a long time, and then she turned to face him. Julian, she said softly, there's something I haven't told you. He looked at her, but didn't let go. Okay. She took a breath, the wind tugging gently at her hair. When we first met, I didn't just find you by accident. Someone hired me to get close to you. He was quiet, eyes steady on hers, not surprised, not angry, just listening. It was supposed to be simple, she continued. I was meant to charm you, make you open up. I don't even know why they didn't tell me much. But then I met you, and I forgot the script. She stepped back just a little. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. Julian studied her. The breeze played with the collar of his shirt, and his eyes didn't leave hers for a second. Elena, he said gently. I already knew. Her breath caught. You did? He nodded, stepping forward again, closing the space between them. Not the details, but something about the way you were, the way you looked at me that first night. I could feel there was more. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to believe you'd tell me when you were ready. He cupped her cheek. And because nothing about what we've shared has ever felt fake. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't look away. He leaned in and kissed her, not urgently, not to erase what she'd said, but to seal it. Forgiveness in the form of lips. Understanding in the press of hands. Love, not in words but in presence. When they parted, she laughed through tears. You really are impossible to fool. He smiled. Only when it matters. They drove home hand in hand. That night, as stars bloomed across the sky and the ocean whispered to the cliffs, Julian held her close in bed, tracing the line of her collarbone with soft, slow fingers. "I'm glad you told me," he murmured. "I'm glad you already knew," she whispered. Neither of them said "I love you." Not yet. But everything in the way they touched, breathed, stayed that said it for them. The morning after she told him the truth felt lighter than any before. No weight, no fear, just sunlight, warm skin, and the feeling of being held without hesitation. Julian woke before her and kissed the inside of her wrist gently, then disappeared downstairs. Elena remained curled under the linen sheets, her fingers brushing the spot where he had been. She listened to the familiar sounds below, water running, a spoon against a ceramic mug, soft music humming from the speakers. It felt like a rhythm she already knew by heart. By the time she came down, wrapped in a robe, her hair still tousled from sleep, the table was set with berries, honey, and freshly baked bread. Julian stood at the stove flipping eggs, barefoot, and humming softly to himself. "You cook like you're in love," she said, leaning in the doorway. He turned, smile lighting his entire face. "Maybe I am." Her heart flipped softly, beautifully. They ate slowly, feeding each other bits of toast and fruit, the sunlight painting gold patterns across the floor. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore, just small ones, daily ones, the kind that last. Later that day, he took her to the edge of the garden where wild roses had begun to bloom. The ones he'd planted days earlier. They were messy and vibrant, soft pink petals tangled with wild vines. She reached down to touch one, fingers grazing the velvety edge of the blossom. "They grew fast," she whispered. Julian's hand found hers. "Some things are ready before you expect them." She looked up at him, the wind lifting her hair. "Stay," he said. "Not as a guest, not as a plan, just as you." Elena didn't hesitate. "I wasn't planning to fall in love," she said, stepping closer. "But I'm not leaving now." He wrapped his arms around her, forehead resting gently against hers. "Good, because everything feels different with you here. The house, the days, the silence, it all feels like something new." That evening, they lay tangled on the couch again, her head on his chest, fingers drawing slow circles on his forearm. The fire was back, soft and low, but they didn't need it for warmth. "Do you miss the city?" Julian asked quietly. "I don't think I've thought about it since the first night I got here. What about your work?" She smiled. "It was never really mine." Julian tilted his head toward her, brushing her hair away from her face. "And this?" She lifted her eyes to his. "This feels like mine." He kissed her slow, deep, and full of that gentle certainty he carried in everything he did. When they pulled apart, neither said a word for a long moment, and then, finally, softly, he whispered, "I love you." Elena smiled. Not the smile she wore for the job, not the one meant to charm or disarm. This was hers, real, full. "I love you too." It was that simple, that quiet, that true. The weeks that followed were filled with small routines. Morning walks along the cliffs, lazy afternoons curled together with books and tea, evenings spent cooking, dancing barefoot in the kitchen, the music low and their laughter louder. There were no more masks, no more pretending. She had been hired to seduce him, and instead, she had fallen into a life that didn't need performances, a love that didn't require a role. Every time he reached for her hand, every time he kissed her temple, every time she caught him looking at her like she was the sunrise, it reminded her, this wasn't a dream or a trick of the heart, this was a choice, and every day, they chose each other. The end.